We've heard reports about bail reform or elimination of bail. And at the same time, we're hearing stories about crime on the increase or anecdotal stories about police arresting and rearresting the same folks. Let's walk through this with Jeffrey Clayton, the executive director of the American Bail Coalition. You're also a lawyer, and you've talked about bail across the country. Are we seeing a backlash against some of these bail reform measures that were so popular over the last few years?
Absolutely. I think it's a combination of two things, not just a backlash against what was bail reform, which I would consider to be sort of get-out-of-jail-free policies, but we're also seeing, I think the pendulum's starting to swing back, where we're starting to see a wide variety of states go with what would traditionally be considered sort of hard-on-crime policies, particularly against repeat offenders.
Even in some more liberal areas or progressive cities, are we seeing that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, you look at two states I would highlight would be Colorado's House Bill 1284 to deny, free bails to multiple-time offenders and to require a minimum bond of $7,500 if you have a prior violent felony conviction. And then if you look at New Jersey, there's a list of over 30 bills where they want to deny bail. And it's low-level offenses, things like DUIs and things traditionally that we wouldn't think of that somebody's going to sit in jail pending trial.
Well, would that indicate that the experiment, I would call it an experiment, failed? That the idea of no bail really just caused crime to increase? Is it a failed issue?
I think it's a failed policy. I think that's what we learned is that what we did is we felt sorry for poor people getting ensnared because they couldn't afford their bail. But really what ended up happening is we were letting out multiple time offenders. And that's what we saw in New York. That's what the data backs up is the people that are really committing all the more crimes and the bad crimes are the people that do it all the time. And that's who, unfortunately, got through under these reforms and what states are looking to correct now.
I want to pause for a minute and ask you about crime statistics. We've also heard news reports from the feds that they're trying to tell us crime, I guess violent crime, is down across the country. I don't know if that's the experience of the everyday American, but how do we walk through some of these reports about crime stats? On one hand, you see all of these retail stores getting robbed blind and closing down. And then on the other hand, you hear that crime is not on the increase. Which is it, I wonder?
It's really hard to say. I mean, I think sometimes public opinion is probably the best gauge of whether crime is up or down. I mean, the statistics tend to show that it's pocketed, that some areas have increases in violent crime. Overall, violent crime is down the last couple of years post-pandemic. But the biggest phenomenon we have going right now is underreporting. People just aren't reporting low-level property crimes because they know the police aren't going to do anything. And that is having a huge impact on the crime statistics because people know, somebody stole my stereo last night, but I'm not calling the police on it, whereas maybe last year I would have. And I think that's deflating how much crime is actually going on out there.
I would imagine this would play a role in the difficulty police departments are having in hiring people, too. Who wants to enter that profession where you can't do what you thought you could do? You know what I mean? I mean, would it make it hard for police, this sort of situation?
Absolutely. And the police are like soldiers going into war. They want to know that the politicians and all the public and everybody supports what they're doing and that they're on their side. And, right now, who would want to be a police officer? Not only is there huge scrutiny on every, aspect of your job, you could get fired, you could go to jail. It's that, you're not backed. And when you catch the suspects, they get right out anyway. So, yeah, it's a demoralizing time to be a police officer right now. This
might be a good time for you to kind of explain to us what is bail, how it works, and how does it differ from a bond that you hear those terms used after someone is arrested or taken to a court for processing. Can you explain how it works?
Absolutely. And under Delaware and sort of the American rule is bail by sufficient sureties except in capital cases, which means everybody has to have a amount of bail set. And a bail is an amount of security which basically defines the terms of your release. That's what bail is. What you have to do to get out would be described as bail. A bond is one way you satisfy that if a monetary amount is imposed. Let's say, for example, $10,000 is imposed for your bail. You can choose to post that in cash, full cash, or you can post a bond, which means a financial guarantee by a bail bondsman, which would be the group of people that I represent. And so that's traditionally how it works. If you don't show up for court, the bond is subject to forfeiture, which means you lose your $10,000, or the person posting the bond, the bail bondsman, either has to pay in full or return you to court. Of course, as you know, bail bondsmen, like Dog the Bounty Hunter, have arrest powers across state lines to bring people back to court when they fail to appear.
Well, one of the arguments for bail reform was bail can't be a punishment. You're not supposed to use it as a punishment, and when you set it so high that someone can't pay and they have to be held in a jail, that's punishment, right? Wasn't that the simplistic way of looking at the argument?
Yeah, I think so. You're basically punishing people solely because they were poor was the argument.
So how do we balance these two, which I can agree with? I don't want to punish someone because they're poor. How do you balance these two things? I mean, what's the proper way of going forward and making this a system that works again?
Well, I think it's really two things. One, it's better due process. We have to rely on judges to make that balance. But the reality is speedy trial. I mean, the real problem is, I'll take South Carolina, for example. If you don't post bail on a felony, you could sit there for 2 years. And that just can't happen in modern America. We've got to speed up these cases. That's the number one way to decrease all the evils of people spending unnecessary time in jail is get to resolution, right? We're going to get to a conviction or get to a dismissal. And we need to do that faster in America. I
agree. And I have said that about Delaware for some time. Hold that thought. We'll continue this discussion. My guest is Jeffrey Clayton, Executive Director of the American Bail Coalition. We're talking about bail and holding people with low bail or no bail, or letting them go actually with no bail, or do we get back to setting a bail that keeps the bad guys behind bars until they can see a judge and have a trial? But we addressed the real way to fix this is by speedier trials. Same thing, we noticed what you said about the amount of time it takes to get to trial. Same thing here in Delaware. It seems like it takes forever.
Yeah, I don't understand that fundamentally. I mean, I represented the Colorado Supreme Court for half a decade, and, I guess we were proud of the fact that speedy trials weren't increasing. But, you'd think with all the modern technology and all this stuff, with electronic exchange of discovery, that we could move things along. But for whatever reason, trial times are not decreasing. They're increasing right now in America, and that's a problem.
And what are we allowed in America? Are we actually allowed a fair and speedy trial? What's the definition of the timeline there of speedy?
Well, that's the problem, too. It's a really flexible concept. It's really only enforced when we deny bail. And the Supreme Court has said, well, when you do that, you've got to try somebody within 90 days. When we say we're going to give you no bail at all, most states, try to have an aspirational deadline of trying felonies within 6 months. But I can tell you, hardly any of them meet that. Most of the trial times are between a year or two. And misdemeanors the same way. The other thing is when people are out of custody on these low-level cases, they can drag on for years because there's no incentive to do anything. So, you got some of these petty offenses where the guys failed to appear 3 times. Those can go on for years.
Right, and those are the guys that are out reoffending all the time. The police are sick of seeing them. Anyway, so this has got to have hurt, I guess, the group you represent, the bondsmen, right? I mean, this whole if you don't need to bond out, what do I need your clients for, right?
Yeah, it has. I mean, I think we've convinced judges that it's bad from a perspective of rich man, poor man, and I think judges have started to buy into that. When in reality, it is the way in America that we create this balance between getting somebody to show up for court and giving them pretrial liberty.
So the backlash, even among progressives, is there. But not everybody's on board. You had some examples of some places that still aren't getting the message, right? Can you tell us what those are?
Absolutely. I mean, I think Illinois is probably one that went down the no money bail road finally last year, and the Supreme Court, left it in play. And there were multiple opportunities to get rid of what is sort of the no money bail act, where the detention, that's probably a third of what it was in Illinois. So we're going to find out how that goes. I think Washington, D.C. didn't listen, ultimately implemented some reforms, and Congress, for the first time immemorial, reversed an act of the D.C. City Council. So there are some cities that I think are continuing down this road. You saw the hard-on-crime prosecutor Kim Ogg in Houston get voted out of office, and so you're going to have another progressive coming into Houston. So I think in some major cities you're seeing some continuing pushes for reforms, but by and large I think the pendulum is swinging back the other way.
What do you think voters, citizens, should look for and listen for when they're voting for prosecutors or others who are in charge of bail in their particular area? What should we be wanting out of these officials?
Well, I think it just comes down to one word, and it's accountability. We have to hold people accountable, and I think really what that comes down to is holding repeat offenders accountable. That's really what you want to hear right now, because in urban areas, repeat offenders are causing a group of 3 to 5% of repeat offenders are causing 60 to 80% of the violent crime in America's cities right now. And so that's what you want to hear is accountability on repeat offenders. Anybody who's doing anything to hold repeat offenders accountable is somebody that you want to vote for.
Another reason, I think it was a false reason, but another reason I heard for bail reform or reducing bail, the jails are too crowded. We have no room for them. I don't know if that's true.
Well, after the pandemic, it's certainly not. I think the U.S. jail population is at a very low level in most places compared to what it has been, over the last 10 years. So I don't think that that's really a big concern right now. And if bail's done right, it shouldn't increase the jail population. It just means we have a little bit more accountability on people that we think are higher risk so that we can get them back when they don't show up for court.
And let's pretend I'm a judge and I'm setting bail. I know there are guidelines, but what is the right way to do bail? How much is too much? How do I set the amount? How would we determine that?
Yeah, there are legal sort of cases in most states that guide this. The way I like to think about it is, what would it take to get the guy back? That's a good measure of what you're going to need. Because if he takes off, let's say, for example, he's a Colombian national, and you're worried that he is going to take off, the bail bondsman has a recovery agent that can go to Colombia, and you're kind of assessing this. Well, it's probably going to take at least $100,000 to $200,000 to get this guy back. Maybe that's a good place to start. I
gotcha. But if he's a local guy, he's not going anywhere, he's never left the state, blah, 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 he has no passport, lower level crime, what would it take to get him, right? And then just sort of look at the...
Yeah, and judges look at the two main factors: prior crimes, prior failures to appear in court, right? So we need to create an incentive for this local guy to show up, and maybe that's to make sure that mom or dad or a third party is going to get involved. So we are going to do kind of sort of a lower level but significant bond to remind this guy that we want him to show up, let's say 5,000 or 10,000.
What is your coalition, and what is your website, and how can we learn more about this issue?
Yep, it's AmericanBailCoalition.org. We're a trade association of insurance companies that underwrite criminal bail bondsmen throughout the state. And please do get involved. This has been a hot issue over the last 10 years, and I think it's going to continue. Right,
and it makes a difference in our state, for example, on who you would want to vote for Attorney General, for instance. They're kind of in control of how this all works. And what our lawmakers, the various representatives, think as well. AMBailCoalition.org. I thank you, Jeff Clayton, for being here. Thank you so much.
Have a great day.